Hey guys, so I wanted to make a quick video so that we could continue our notes that we started the last time that you were here in class. We talked about the Republic and how it was starting to fall apart. So, of course, the Republic, just as a reminder, is a type of government where the people are choosing some of their leaders. Um, in theory, this is great because this means that there's people that are representing you that you've chosen. But it doesn't, of course, always work out that way. And it's going to kind of end with Caesar because if you remember, after Caesar comes and attacks Rome, um, he's actually going to force the Senate to name him dictator, which definitely does not fall under Republic at all because he's forcing them to name him that. The people are not choosing him. Also, as a reminder, Julius Caesar is going to keep the Senate in place, but he doesn't allow them to do anything. And the reason that he did that was because he wanted it to sort of be that smokescreen that the people still had a say in government, even though he was the dictator. So when we continue our second half here of our little Star Wars Republic to Empire, we're actually going to start out with how right here the death of Caesar sends Rome into a new round of civil wars. And one of the biggest reasons that's going to happen is because people are actually going to argue over who is going to be in charge and who is going to take over the government. So we're going to have two important people here. First is Julius Caesar's chief general, and his name is Mark Antony. We also are going to have somebody named Octavian, who was Caesar's grandnephew. So those two people, Mark Antony and Octavian, are going to work together to actually try to figure out who killed Caesar. So they don't actually really figure that out because I think in the long run, the people who were involved were definitely covering for each other and realized it was probably better for everybody that Caesar was gone. And so that's not going to really happen. They're not going to figure it out. But while they were working together at the beginning for this purpose, in the end, they're not because they're actually going to fight with each other over who is going to take over the government. So it's not going to be a super smooth sailing thing between these two. Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew, is finally going to defeat Mark Antony and his queen, who is Cleopatra in Egypt. So Mark Antony and Cleopatra are actually in Egypt at this time, and they are going to get defeated, and then Octavian's going to take over. Now, let's go ahead and add this here. So he's going to defeat them. He is going to take over power in Rome. And this is really the official end of the Republic. This is when things become the empire because while the Senate is involved, they're actually going to basically tell Octavian he can take over. It's again a forceful thing. Nobody voted for him, nobody picked him. He takes over by force. So then this gets a little bit confusing because they give him the title of Augustus. Basically, that translated to mean the exalted one or the super important one. And so he starts to go by the name Augustus instead of Octavian. So just need you guys to realize that Octavian and Augustus are the exact same person. He just kind of changes his name when he takes over. So once he is sort of in power with the Senate's blessing, of course, that's when everything changes. Now, you might remember we talked about how the people didn't want a king. That's why they had a republic, because they wanted to make sure that they were choosing their leader and not have somebody who took over and have somebody who just passed it on generation to generation. So Augustus is super smart, and he does not call himself king, even though he has absolute power. Nobody else has any power, and he plans to name his successor. So when he dies or when he decides to step down, he's going to name the next person who takes over. So when this happens, this is really the official end of the Republic. So we're going to talk at the bottom about what life was like under Augustus, because he actually does a lot of really good things. And so I want this to sort of be a separate section for you guys. So if you want to go underneath the Rome under Augustus section, basically, for somebody who's exercising absolute power, he actually does a whole lot of really good things. So first of all, he's going to have high-level jobs available to basically anybody. So you don't have to come from a wealthy class. As long as you were smart and capable of doing the job, he didn't care what class you came from, you could do high-level government jobs. Of course, this is only going to apply to men, right? Because women were not included in this in terms of jobs and the citizenship. So high-level jobs open to men of all classes. Next, he's going to come up with the census. So hopefully you guys know what a census is, because we're actually going through one right now in our country. So a census is a population count. And there's a lot of reasons why you would want to count your population. We use it to help with figuring out how many representatives you get in the Congress, because the House of Representatives is based on the amount of population that you have in your state. Our senators are equal for every state. There's 2 for each one. But the House of Representatives is based on population. Here, Augustus wants this because he wants to make sure that he knows every single person who's there to make sure that they're paying their taxes appropriately. So that's the reason he does it, those tax purposes. Obviously, taxes are used to do government things and things like that, roads, pay for schools, and so he wants to make sure that everybody is paying their fair share. Part of what he does with that is he's going to create a postal service, which you might think is not such a huge deal, but it kind of was. So this actually allowed for things to travel, because the Roman Empire was so big at this point that it allowed things to travel around, and they knew that it was trustworthy. You weren't just sending some random messenger, somebody that you had hired. This is actually somebody who works for the government that was going to be transporting these goods. In order to make trade run better, he is actually going to create a new coin system. So it's not the first time that we have seen people actually using money at all. We've seen coins in some of the ancient times. However, he's going to create a new system that's going to be pretty much set up just for Rome. He's also going to create jobs, because again, what politician doesn't create jobs or say they're going to? So this is going to be creating things like roads. This is what they are going to start with. So building roads and working on other things. He even sends people to become farmers and basically gets them all set up with a farm and with the crops, the seeds and things that they need beforehand. So really, under Augustus, despite the fact that he's the first really emperor of this era, it's not going to be a terrible thing. So we have to keep that in mind, because a lot of times in history, we definitely have a feeling that emperors and dictators are always bad, but that's definitely not always the case. So I think it's safe that we can add on here that Octavian is actually going to improve the government and the economy for Rome, because all of these things that he did are really going to make Rome a pretty good place to live. So again, despite the fact that he's an emperor, he sort of forces his way into power. Things are not terrible under him. And we can look at all those things that we listed down below that sort of speak to that and let us know. Now, just because he was good does not mean that all of the people who come after him were as good as him. In fact, they flat out aren't. I'm just going to tell you. Several of them were very weak. They were not competent at their job. They couldn't make decisions. Sometimes they made stupid decisions that were kind of dangerous to Rome overall. It allowed enemies to come and sort of attack them. But one guy, for example, actually appointed his favorite horse to be one of his counsels to give him advice. So must have been a pretty smart horse. Nero, who you guys are going to read a little bit more about, Nero actually is accused of setting a massive fire in Rome and literally standing by and watching the city burn and sort of laughing about it. They say he was playing a musical instrument and singing while the city burned beneath him. And they're pretty sure he started that fire. So that's not good. But some of them actually were. So we do have some good emperors. We refer to this time as Pax Romana, which is basically a translation that means Roman peace. So Roman peace sounds like a good thing, right? This is actually going to last for about 200 years. It's going to begin with Augustus, and it does have some of those bad ones thrown in there, just so you know. But overall, starting with Augustus and going for about 200 years, you're actually going to see peace and order and unity and good economy with just those few not great ones sprinkled in. So this is sort of where you see that massive Roman army that I think you would think of if you saw them in movies. They had a giant army. Their empire was stretched large, and the army protected them. They went to all kinds of distant lands. They took trade to all parts of the empire. The Egyptian farmers, who were sort of part of the Roman Empire at this time, actually gave the Romans grain from their areas. In other parts of Africa, they got ivory, which of course comes from the tusks of elephants and rhinos. They brought gold, which is mined in Africa. Other animals like the lions, we talked about actually having them be part of the Colosseum, part of those gladiator matches. All of those came from the people they were trading with in Africa. They're also going to start to send people along the Silk Road, which is going to bring things like silk and other goods from China. Silk is actually the web sort of from a silkworm, and so it takes a whole lot of that silkworm web to make enough silk to actually create clothing. So that's going to be something that, of course, the very wealthy, the emperors, are going to be wearing, but not the average person. So if you lived within the Roman Empire, you could basically move about freely. So unlike the Spartans, who sort of refused to let people leave, you were able to still travel wherever you wanted to within the Roman Empire. So the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, is this 200 years. The very first emperor in that time I mentioned was Augustus. The last good emperor we refer to him was Marcus Aurelius, who's also going to do some really great things and was sort of big into the military. So this is sort of how the Romans, we see that republic turns into the empire. And normally in history, when we have the emperors, it's bad, but it really wasn't necessarily bad for this part of the Roman Empire. Of course, their empire is going to fall apart later. That tends to happen with most empires. They get too big at some point, and so that's kind of be sort of what's going to happen to the Roman Empire.